Hello all and welcome to a new PentaBAR. It's Wednesday and it's at noon. We have our usual live at PentaBAR. Some are live, some are behind the Zoom doors that you need subscription for, but it's free. Subscribe and you'll get all the info that Pentalog is here to share with you. May that be live coding, may that be more techy or sharing experience from some very, very nice professionals. And today we have a very nice subject and nice weather because this time the PentaBAR caught me on an island. But that's not the subject of today. We'll speak about how to convince stubborn stakeholders to use research and more specifically user research that can save the products. And for that, we have Mara Dumitru with us, the product design lead from Wefox, one of the Germany's fintech unicorns. And we'll discuss how can we do that. You know what happens when stakeholders fall in love with their own products? They can get lost in the reflection of their own biases. And we also know that we project a lot whenever we have one idea or we think about our product that we love that much. And building great products begins with a lot of empathy. And that means also knowing what the user really wants. So UX and UI design are important, but also is user testing. So getting feedback from your real user is essential for this success. And just to pinpoint some of the subject that we'll use today, we'll look at user research, what it is and what can it do for your product, hands-on tips and tricks on user research, and we'll find how it is done, and the must follow-up steps in product success evaluation, and how can we make sure that we build the products that we want. We'll learn how to differentiate between usability test and value testing, and maybe how to talk with the stakeholders that this is valuable. As I said, we have Mara Dumitru with us, who is an experienced UX researcher and product design, now lead at Wefox, specializes in user testing. And she is the driving force between this fintech, which is also the unicorn, as I said, and its design team, establishing the best practices and setting up processes between design and user testing teams. She has a background in user-centered product management, and she previously worked in Berlin startups in industries such as financial services, travel, and online food delivery, which is, we know that is very important nowadays. So this being said, Mara, if you can hear us,
hello,
welcome.
Yes. Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm excited to be here. I'm really excited to be here, yes, and I'm quite jealous of where you are. I'm still in winter mode here, but happy that you're enjoying.
I can show you the beach side, but it's really a contre-jour, and I prefer the fans here and help me cope with the heat. But I like your plates there.
Yes.
Very traditional.
Well, they look traditional. They're Spanish, actually. You could say they're Romanian, but they're not.
Nice. I could have said, yeah.
Yes.
So you're based in Berlin now?
Yes.
Good. How did you end up there?
It's a funny story. So I left Romania after high school. I went to Paris to do my studies. I did a double major in computer science and psychology, and then specialized in human-computer interaction because I wanted to keep both tech side and have the user in mind and understand what users need, what they think like, and how we can build successful products for them that solve an actual need. So I thought that I would continue my career in user research right after my master's. That didn't happen. I ended up switching to product management and moving to Berlin. I decided over a weekend. And here I am 6 years later. And as you mentioned, I've been working in a few startups where I also wore the UX hat. So even though I was a product manager for this time, I always did user interviews, user research, prototype testing, and last summer I decided to go back to my original passion, which was design, and I'm now leading a team of designers at Wefox.
That's brilliant, and I like how you combine, computer science and tech and psychology. Both are passions of mine. I've been myself a graduate of polytechnics and computer science, but then I went into coaching and training, which is a lot based on human psychology and how we function. And I think we'll touch this and we'll pinpoint these subjects. But before that, tell us a bit about Wefox and maybe what's new there.
Yes, I can provide a bit of background because this is important. There have been a few changes recently. So Wefox is an insurtech startup, unicorn, as you mentioned, based in Berlin.
Yeah.
And it used to offer people the ability to connect to a broker and help them find the right insurance company and product. So assuming that you don't know what you need, which is a real problem that people have, and you don't know what products to choose and what company to choose because there are so many of them, you would connect to a broker and the broker would give you personalized advice and help you find the right fit for you. Over the last summer, we merged with one of our sister companies, which is One Insurance, who creates our own line of insurance products. So now the new Wefox is that you can go to Wefox and you can get one of our own products that we create in-house. Or if you're interested in one of the products that we don't yet offer, but we will eventually, you can still connect to one of our brokers who can advise you on what's best for you. So it's really, you can get everything that you need through us. What's special about Wefox is that we focus on empowering customers to be independent and be able to file claims on their own. So this is what we call self-service. We allow you to not need to interact with a human when you don't need to. When you have an issue, such as you have a leak in your house, you want to solve that immediately. So with the app, you can file a claim and you get the feedback that that's being taken care of immediately. Another thing that makes us special is that we empower brokers to get customers a lot quicker than our competition. So this is how we acquire customers through our portal that eases the processes for brokers to onboard new customers. And what's maybe the highlight of the latest news is that we have started working with a team of AI specialists that are based in Paris to work on risk prevention. So we don't want to be a typical insurance or a normal insurance company that just gives you claim policies that you can be protected. What we want is to prevent 30% of bad things, preventable bad things from happening to you. And we do that with AI because we can learn so much more through automation and through all the patterns that AI can detect to be able to prevent anything that, for example, it can range from weather conditions when we know that you're driving and maybe we suggest that this is not the best time to do so, or anything that's connected to your home. There's so much that we can do in this space, and this is what we are exploring at the moment.
Oh, very interesting. That's a new realm to actually conquest.
It also has a lot to do with user research because it can be a sensitive topic. So we want to make sure that people react to it in a positive way, are prepared for it, and understand the benefits of it and accept it in their lives rather than being something intrusive.
I can feel it like that. I can, immediately I can feel it ringing in my head, will this be accepted or not? And that's why we're talking about actually user testing. Okay. And a question also for the frame of it. How did Wefox, and maybe for some of our listeners, how did Wefox become an unicorn? I mean, from a product perspective, what actually led them as a product there? And maybe,
yes, I can explain. So it's the reason why we were able to scale so quickly is because we don't have high cost for customer acquisition. So if you look at other competitors, they focus a lot on direct, on acquiring customers through marketing, making it possible for them to sign up on their own. But what we have focused on is on the broker. So empowering brokers to get good leads, because in insurance, there are different type of customers that you may want to acquire for different type of products. So having this information available to the brokers or to the sales agents to be able to target the right customers that bring us the biggest revenue. So this is the main reason, and of course, being able to work with third-party insurance companies that are many of them, and we have connected with them and allowed customers to get those, while in parallel opening our channels to create our own line of products. So being able to scale quite quickly. Also this self-service that I was mentioning. So because there is no need for a human to be involved in the process, because we have automated and digitalized a lot of these processes, we were able to focus on the sales more than the operations. So it's a lot in the sales.
So now that I mean the hyper growth is there and everything, I mean, and you have tremendous plans, do you still make a lot of tests, or are just the users are attached to the product and you need less?
No, I think testing is important at any stage of your product and company development cycle. It depends what you're doing. So in our case, we are still rolling out big features and new features. And for this particular use case, we do prototype testing either with target users when there is a need. So when we identify the need to have real users or users that are similar to the target users that we have, to be able to test whether the feature that we are rolling out is not just usable, but also desirable and will solve a problem. So if we take the example of the broker who needs to onboard and acquire a lot of customers as part of their goals, and they need to go through a lot of steps, especially with the more complicated insurance products, to make sure that they have answers to all the questions and they don't also bore the customer. This is where we choose to test directly with the brokers, because the target user is here valuable in the testing, and we need to know that what we are doing will significantly impact their day-to-day and will make a difference and will make it easier for them and also more successful. So in this case, we always test, I would say, maybe not every sprint, but every other sprint or so, I'm involved in the prototype testing that are being designed, and then the team is testing with the actual users. But this is so valuable, and it doesn't take as much time as you would think. You really just need 3 to 5 people, and then you immediately get feedback. And what is most valuable in user research is that it helps you find out if you're wrong, which is something that you should be really happy about. If you realize that you're wrong about something, that means you have eliminated an assumption that could have cost you a lot more in the future if you go ahead and implement something that is not working as you expect and not bringing the revenue that you expect. So that is the case where we test with real users. On the other side, we test internally when it comes to usability testing. So if we roll out a new set of filters or something, that if you take any example, like if you go to booking.com and you want to select a hotel and you have very specific needs, like you want a jacuzzi, you want to be able to cancel your reservation for free, you want to be able to bring your dog. All these filters are patterns or elements, interactive elements that you should be able to recognize and interact with without needing to know the context, without needing to be the target user. So in this case, and I really highly encourage everyone to do that, if you identify that the use case is a usability type of testing, do it with anyone from your team who doesn't know the product. It can be your legal team, it can be anyone at all who hasn't seen the product on a regular basis. And this is something that we try to do as a reflex to be sure that what we are rolling out is usable and people don't get stuck and then have to call customer support, which again is not always scalable. So
Yeah.
Everyone should test regardless of where you are in your journey.
So that's a problem of scalability, but I mean, and you mentioned usability tests, and I imagine trust is very important as you're in a hyper growth in insurance tech company, as an insurance company. Let us structure a bit. So you have usability tests. What other kind of tests?
Yeah, so maybe differentiate between a new product or a new feature and an existing one.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And there are two types of user research. You have generative user research, which happens at the beginning when you have nothing, and then you have evaluative. So in the case where you don't have a product or you're working on a totally new feature that doesn't exist yet, you want to start with your users. You want to see if you know your users well. Do you know who is your target audience? If not, you should start there. So if you don't know that well enough, then you should have a hypothesis of who your user is and then recruit people that match your hypothesis. So you should think about demographics, you should think about what behaviors they might have that are relevant to your product, what needs and goals they might have, and then try to recruit people, either actual users if you have access to them, or people who are similar to that, and run interviews to see if your assumptions are close to reality. They might not be, and that's totally okay. Your persona will always evolve, and you should always update the definition of your persona. But you should always start with that in mind and also identify the problems that you want to solve. And then once you do that, you have that, especially interviews. So maybe let me spend some time on interviews. When you do user interviews, you should create the questions in such a way that they don't lead the user to a certain answer. So you want to use open-ended questions, and you want to feel like a therapist a little bit. So you want to say, how does that make you feel? I can see you're angry about this. Why are you angry? Or anything that taps deeper into why people think or feel the way they do. But what's most important is don't expect people to tell you what they need, and don't expect them to make generalizations up front. So let's take the example of recommending travel destinations. You cannot possibly expect people to say, oh, I really want a product that does this because these are the types of problems I have when I'm looking to find a destination to travel. What you should rather do is ask them to remember the last time they traveled or the last time they did something, because that's when they will have the story clear in mind, and they will be able to make generalizations at the end after going through, reliving the experience that they've had. So try to take them through the last time that they did something you're interested in, and ask as many questions as you can to identify pain points, but don't necessarily say, oh, that must be so bad. Make them tell you everything that they experienced, and then at the end of the interview ask, okay, so what would you say is the number one thing that is really bothering you in this case? And they would be able to tell you that a lot easier than if they didn't have to go through the whole experience telling you what they lived.
So make inquiries as for them to recreate experience, then use questions to reflect upon the experience and make generalizations upon that.
Yes.
And don't ask features up front, because they're not software designers.
For sure not.
Listen for the emotions, listen for what they have to offer.
Definitely. Even if people know exactly what they want, they may not know, or they may not tell you something that actually makes sense for your business to build.
It's actually, I'm very much into this, and it's a combination of of really observing, deeply observing stuff and listening, really listening. And I have this quote. I don't even know if it's real or if it was like that. Maybe you can tell us. But I mean, Ford apparently was saying, if I would have asked people what they would want, they would have asked for a faster carriage, not a car.
Yes.
And also about the phone. I mean, before the iPhone, they would have asked for a tinier and a little clapet, not the iPhone. So really listening for what's a need or wish It's
Yes.
very different from asking what they want.
Yes, exactly. The example I read about recently, which is really nice to tell, is in the 90s when people used to have CDs. And no one would have told you, oh, I wish I would have all my music on my phone and pay a subscription every month for it. But what you could have understood if you had asked, okay, so what are the problems with the way you listen to music? And they would say, oh, I usually just like one or two songs from an album, but I always have to buy the whole album, and then I don't have space to stock them, and so on. So it's all in the questions, and then you don't need, again, for qualitative research, you don't need more than 10 interviews. 10 is really a really good number, but if it's 5 to 7, it's quite okay. And then once you start interviewing, you start seeing repeating patterns. You start seeing that people say the same things, and it's not just an edge case or an isolated case somewhere. And that's the things that you should pay attention to. So after you go through the interview phase, you should map out, like a mind map or something, all the things that are repeating, where you see, there's something more there to dig into, or there's something that we could potentially solve with the technology that we have. So then after you do that, you should have a really low fidelity wireframe, or even a few options that you can then do prototype testing with. So the prototype testing doesn't have to be fancy. You shouldn't be ashamed to show something that's black and white or scribbled on a piece of paper, as long as you can get feedback really quickly that can validate your assumptions. Because the more you spend on your solution, the more you will think it's a good solution. And the danger that happens is that you get so attached, as do stakeholders, because that's also why stakeholders are so stubborn and don't want to be told that they're wrong, because especially if they create an idea, they get attached and they think it's a good idea. It's really natural for that to happen. Also, they're also humans, so everyone does that. So what the best thing you can do is test as quickly as you can. And if you don't have time to create a prototype, if you don't use Figma or can use InVision or any of the prototype tools, you can also print it out and show people on paper. This is something that I've done earlier on, and I've used two versions because I couldn't decide which one was better. In the end, I did a mix between the two, but you can show one version and then the second version. And then to the next person, you swap them and you show version number 2, version number 1 next. And then you'll see people say, oh, the first one was a lot clearer, or I like that better. This I really didn't understand. And it's really so quick to do. You don't need people who are trained in user research or human-computer interaction to do that. Everyone on the team can do that. If you understand for which type of situation you need a certain type of test. So if it's a usability test, you can do it in-house. If you need the user because you need to understand if it's valuable, solves a problem, and is desirable, you need to recruit the actual users or target users, which, yes, can take a bit more time, but it's not insanely much. So after you go through this round of wireframe testing, obviously you will iterate on your designs a bit more, but it's really a process where you should get feedback as much as possible, and don't be afraid to launch something that you're embarrassed by. If you're not embarrassed, then you've waited too long to launch. So
heard that.
Yes, I think it's a famous quote.
Yeah.
You should really not be afraid to celebrate the moments when you're wrong, because that is a success, really. If you realize that something that you were counting on and you thought, okay, this will solve the problem, and you've got the feedback early on that it's not good and you need to tweak it, that is a major success. So that's for the part where you don't have a product yet, and yet obviously after you do that, you should try to sell your product to people, even if it's a beta version, even if it's a PowerPoint deck. Try to see if people are prepared to pay money, or whatever your business model is, because it can be cool, it can be a fancy feature, but if no one will come back to it, you haven't really achieved what you wanted to. So try to sell your product as quickly as possible, even if it's not ready, even if it's just an idea. Try to do that. So that's for the new, yes.
So that's the new product.
Yes, that's for the new
What
product.
happens after?
Well, after you should implement tracking so that you know how people use your product. But the tracking is not standalone, and neither is qualitative research. So it's not one or the other, it's a mix. And what qualitative research does, it tells you the why behind the what. So with the analytics tools that you implement, you understand where there are issues or where the product is not used to the extent that you want it to. But then what you need to do is go in and understand why. Is it because, so for example, people might spend a long time for a specific type of page or on a specific type of step in your process. That can mean that they're really engaged, or that can also mean they don't know what they're doing and they don't know what to do next. You don't know if you don't ask them. So you always need to understand, of course, you should understand what success looks like and what you want to achieve. But then look at the numbers and understand, okay, what is not going the way we hoped? Let's try to talk to users and understand why that is. So it's a constant process of evaluation. So the second step or the second type of research evaluative happens after the product is live. That's when you should always evaluate how people use your product and identify also gaps. Maybe see if it's not a question necessarily of usability, if people don't know how to, but maybe there is a gap that you can fill when you understand that, oh, there's a missing step, or we could bring so much more value if we added something or if we simplified something. So if you already have an existing product, and you can always make your product better, there is no such thing as a perfect product. What you need, of course, is to understand whether you know your users well enough, whether you know who your user is. If everyone in the company should be able to describe their target user. And then look at the numbers, see where there are issues. If you have tracking, if you don't have tracking, go and implement tracking. And then go out in the field if you can. Observe the users in their natural state with the product, if that's something that you have available. If you don't, then you need to somehow convince people, give them incentives to come in and interview them while they're using your product, and have them walk you through the steps and talk out loud and say, this is something that I didn't really understand at the beginning. This is how I'm using it now. This is really useful. This is something that I never knew what this does. And the best thing that you can do as someone who does testing is to enforce the fact that you want to get criticism, that this is something that you're looking for and that is really valuable. So tell people that they're not hurting your feelings if they tell you that something is bad or not clear. That's what you're looking
count for the shame and compensate for that, and really create a safe space for them to share.
Yes, definitely. And make it clear that you're not looking for praise, that you're not there saying, oh, isn't this the coolest product that you've ever seen? And here is a €5 voucher for Amazon. It's the contrary. And if it helps, you can just say, I am the tester. I did not implement this. I did not contribute to the design process of this. I'm just here as a neutral person who is helping the company test their features. So the more things that you have that are considered criticism or not clear or bugging you in any way, please feel free to share with us, because it will help us make the product better for you. Because what we want is to create an experience that helps you, our user. And then with this, so another point that you can do in your convincing stakeholder initiative is to record these testings. Because if you just go to your stakeholder and say, we think this is not clear enough, you have no data to back it up. Or I've talked to 2 users. maybe people don't know that in qualitative research, it's already significant if 5 people tell you the same things, assuming those people are target users. But try to educate people on what design is, what the best practices are, and show them a little clip that's maybe 5 minutes where you see users struggling with something that is so clear to everyone else because they've created it, they thought about it many, many times. So it's normal, and it can come as a shock when you say, but are they stupid or what? No, users are not stupid. It's really easy to create something that is a bit complicated to use. So don't be afraid to show proof in an impersonal way. So it's not that you want to pick a fight or you want to say, look, it's bad. I told you it was bad. That's really not the attitude to have. But rather, look, I have a hunch. When I first saw this, I thought it was a bit difficult, thinking about our users who are maybe, I don't know, people who don't have all the time in the world to spend on the product. They need to do this quickly. When I was working at Delivery Hero, our users were restaurants who needed to deliver food to their customers, and it was go, 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 go. In the kitchen, it was hot. Food flying around, drivers coming in, not knowing where they were supposed to drive. Speed was really important there, because if you deliver the food that's cold, then you get really bad ratings. You don't get new customers ordering from your restaurant. So I realized when I went to visit the restaurants that our product was too complex. It was great to use in an office where you knew what the steps were and you could choose so many options and get this algorithm that told you what the route should be for your drivers and which driver should pick it up. But in reality, not all drivers were logged into the system. Some drivers had other orders that didn't come through the system. No one had the time to manually input the other orders, even though we had that feature available for this use case. Yeah. So it's really important to see what the real case scenario is and to bring that information back to the team, because not everyone will have the opportunity to go to the users and see how they use it. But one person from the team can do this. Anyone can go and observe, take a little video, and then bring this information back and show that this is the reality. This is what we thought the reality was. Not the same thing, but we can fix it.
Yeah, it's like if we're talking Romania, you know, I actually called a car in Bolt, and a car branded by Uber came, you know, to take me. And I mean, you know, it's a plan in the headquarters, and then there's the reality. And I can imagine, I mean, I've seen also, I was observing, you know, the go behavior in the restaurants where they're going, and with the gloves, they were, you know, they just needed to push 2 buttons, you know, accept, send, and that was it. I mean, inputting was not the thing.
No, exactly. So yes, it's a lot that you can learn, and then most of the time it's about simplifying the product, because when you want to create something, you think, oh, the more complicated, the more complex, the more smart, the more special. But no, it doesn't have to be like that. It can be really simple. It can just be 2 steps. 2 steps are a lot more valuable than 5 sometimes. But not always. I mean, sometimes if you take onboarding, for example, don't try to reduce the number of clicks as a general rule, because sometimes you need steps that give you the feedback that you're on the right track. So it really depends on what the situation is, but that's where you need to understand your user, the use case, the context, what you're trying to achieve. Is time important? How do people convert? What are some of the reasons why people drop out of the process if it's a lengthy process? It's all about not being afraid to go and meet your users and understand them. User research is all about observation and understanding human behavior.
Very well put. Now about, I mean, passing through requirements and maybe behavior. Yeah. Or do you want to go to features now, or we talk stakeholder, and then
we can take stakeholder.
Okay. So what do they usually require for? we're talking about convincing stubborn stakeholders. What are the requirements that are in the brief, and what happens next?
So stakeholders are really interested in releasing features fast and not expensive, right? The cost is really important here. So if you go and say, actually, I want to release a bit later and I want to spend some budget on this thing that is a bit fuzzy and you don't know what it brings, but I think it's gonna make some changes to be in the interest of the user, the common answer that you get is no, which is totally understandable. So, of course, what I would recommend in this case is try to identify for which type of features you need some testing and manage expectations of stakeholders so that you explain well in advance that there is time available in the development process that can be allocated for testing, which will help the overall success of the product. So if stakeholders are obviously interested in the success and in revenue, right? So if you say that I have something that we can do, which is almost free or free, and can bring us more money than we would actually make otherwise. And what's really important to explain is that the cost of redoing something that is not clear is a lot higher than spending a bit upfront to do some testing. So I would say what's most important to them is the cost and being able to release quickly something that they think is going to make an impact.
And how do you usually convince them? What's your approach?
It takes time, so I would suggest you to be patient, and trust is really important. So not making them feel that you're attacking their creation or their opinion, but rather making them feel that you're on the same place as, yes, the same mission. What you want is the product and the company to be successful, and you want something that will make an impact in users' lives and will eventually make people recommend the product to others. Because in my mind, the most successful, the proof that your product is successful is when people recommend your product just because they want to. They have no outsider incentive to do that. So that's what you want to achieve, for people to actively want to talk about your product and tell their friends that it makes a difference in their lives.
We actually have some questions, and we're waiting for them. And on this moment, I would open up for any questions that there might be. But I'm looking, before responding that, I'm looking at your stance, and I just love your energy, and I can imagine you convincing stakeholders, listening to your paraverbal and non-verbal. So it's a lot about how you say the things, because I imagine anything you would say, it will sound, serene, there with the good intentions and very settled, and not very opinionated, like we need to do that. No, it's there. We have time. It's you have a quieting energy.
Thank you.
Was this an educated thing that you acquired on the longer run, or?
I think I've always been interested in the psychology of people, and in my first experience with the food delivery company, I had a stakeholder that was extremely stubborn and not receptive to making any changes when I suggested them. So I realized that I could win his trust over time with other small things. I let that on in the back of our minds, so the feature that I thought was too complicated, but I started doing other small improvements that he was receptive to. And I think this is part of the strategy, if you want to call it, but really understanding how your stakeholders feel and think and what motivates them, and trying to be on their side and opening their eyes little by little to the value of design. So what you can do is start using or doing usability tests in-house for little features and showing that, look, we managed to improve this, and the data shows that people are using it more easily, or there are fewer calls in customer care because of on this topic. So it's really smaller things that make people more aware of the value of user research and raising this awareness on a company level. So helping people do it on their own helps people become more receptive. And in the end, you can say, you know, that thing that we mentioned a few months ago, let's maybe try to make a small change. We did a prototype test on our own. We tested that, and this was the response. So try to spend the time, if you haven't, if you can, on something that is really low fidelity and show the proof, show people's reactions. And another thing you can say is also, it's gonna help us in maintaining the code, because we will have less to maintain or less complexity if you're going for simplification. It depends what you're going for, but try to find the arguments that matter. So if it's about scalability, if it's about complexity in the code, if it's about how prone a feature is to bugs, or how dangerous it is if we release something with a potential issue, anything that you understand that makes people more receptive to something, use it, but not in a manipulative way, but rather just understanding people from their point of view. So trying to empathize from their side, because again, they're also people, and they have reasons to be maybe a bit close to the idea of making changes to something they think is solid. So that's something that I've learned over time, and I've dealt with many different type of stakeholders, and I've understood that everyone is different, but you can adapt to their way of being and understand what matters to them, and bring that to light.
And that's actually real life proof that you can really listen and observe the users as you're observing the internal stakeholders also. But I go straight to the point of Augustin from Facebook, who are broadcasting on multiple channels. So he's saying like this: reaching end users is quite difficult in highly specialized domains like scientists or physicians, while booking their time can also be expensive, more often than not, and you end up interviewing the IT admin. Any ideas how to incentivize large organizations to really care about actual real end users?
Yeah, that's a good question. I also had this issue when I was not allowed to interview real users for privacy issues, because it was a B2B2C type of company I was working at. I would start with interviewing more people that have access to the users, so that you already have more data. And then if it's possible, so if it's not a legal issue, if it is possible, but it's just a matter of money, I would try to bring the awareness of how different it is to interview real users versus people who are not real users but think they know the user. So, for example, if you interview customer care people, those people only, or IT admin, those people only interact with the people, the customers who have issues. Those are not the core users. They don't represent the majority of your users. So you're losing a lot of information in that. So I would start with educating the company on the values of getting real insights from real customers. And if you can, try to get one interview that has enough data that you can broadcast or record and show the recording, so that you have actual proof that shows you, look, if we got 5 more of these, you really don't need a lot of numbers. But if we got 5 more that give us the type of valuable information that we got out of just one, which somehow we managed to do, and you show that in a video, or an audio tape, or even a script that you take notes and you quote exact words that people said that bring a lot of information that help you define the way you prioritize your features, the way you should change your features or improve them. In the end, it's value to the company. So if that makes a huge difference, that should be convincing enough, I would say.
What really struck me when we were speaking is that you made a very clear and structured difference between usability testing and value testing. Can you, maybe we've touched a bit, but in a structured manner, explain the difference between the two and see what's there?
Yeah, so usability testing goes back to the example I mentioned with booking.com with the filters. So if you're working on a new feature or you are evaluating an existing feature that anyone should be able to interact with, no matter who they are, then that is a usability type of testing. So it's really outside of the context. It has to do a lot with interaction design. So having to click on elements that give you feedback, that make you understand what it means to click on something, and then what is the result of you clicking and how do you undo it. These are type of actions that you should be able to do regardless who you are, if you are the target user or not. And what you need is to be able to identify if it's such a case, if it's really an isolated type of feature that helps the bigger picture of doing an onboarding process from A to B, or running a report that makes you understand what your profit was over the last month, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. You will always have some sort of widgets or interactive elements that may not be so obvious to implement. You may know what the filters do if it's a filter type of example, but not everyone is able to understand them upfront. So if it's this type of usability testing, go ahead and do them with anyone from your company who hasn't seen the product and who is not biased, who does not have information to help them do the task. You can do it on a prototype. Most likely here you need a prototype, and you can do this with Figma really easily. You don't need to code anything. If you don't have Figma, you will need to code a little bit maybe, but it really is important to do it from the beginning to an end. So what is the hover state? How does it look when you haven't clicked on it? When you have clicked on it, what's active? You would be surprised how much gets lost when you don't test all the steps, and then you end up implementing them and you realize, oh, it's not clear that it's active. It looks disabled. It's really important. So these types of testing you can do with anyone. You don't need to spend money. You don't need the target users. It doesn't take time. Really easy to do, and it should be a habit. The value testing is a situation where it can be as usable as you can make it. But if people, and when I say people, I mean your target users who are paying customers or bringing you revenue, don't want to use it or don't feel that it brings them any value or solves their problem or makes them convinced enough to spend their time or their money on it, then it's really pointless. So that's when you need to recruit either your active customers, if you have access to them, or people who resemble them. If you know who they are, then you recruit people in the same age, in the same demographics, the same, any elements that are important, that are relevant, and put them in context. So don't just throw them the feature and say, would you like to use it? And they say, yes, give me the voucher and buy. It's really setting the tone of, okay, imagine you have this product, you are in the situation where I can give you an example with the car sharing. So if you are using a car sharing app and you are really on a run, you have to go from a meeting to a meeting, you're in the middle of the city, it's difficult to park, you're running late, and this feature allows you to give the car to someone who wants to rent it after you, but you don't need to park it. You just receive a notification saying someone has reserved the car, they're waiting for you at your destination. All you need to do is stop, put your PIN, that person will put their PIN, and they take the car and they go. How would you experience this feature? Would you choose this feature over a competitor that doesn't have this feature? Maybe even if it's a bit more expensive. And this is where you need to recruit people who live in cities where parking is a problem, where they are busy, where time is really important to them. If that is the core of your user base, and if you think that those are the people who are paying for this type of feature, and that's how you understand that it makes sense to invest time and development into building such a feature, which is not an easy feature to build.
Yeah.
But if it's only a few people that say, "Oh yeah, it's cool, but I always have parking space," or I'm never in a rush. It's just a cool feature.
Or
but
it's just more complicated to find the other person and swap
Yes,
cars.
exactly. So what happens, I had this feature and then it wasn't available anymore. It was really cool, but then the person would find another car closer to them that was already there, and they would cancel the reservation that they did with me when I was driving and take the other car. So it's a cool feature, but it's really not that used. So those are things where you need actual target users to really validate whether it makes a difference and whether people really want that feature and want to invest using it. They want to spend money on it. They convert to it.
We'll softly go to, towards landing our plane in our discussion. And I'll ask some, let's spice a bit of discussion. So how do you know a product is successful?
So I touched upon this briefly. For me, it's really important when people talk about products, and I've seen myself talk about this car sharing product that I love, and everyone thinks the company paid you to do this, right? Like, no, I'm actually really excited about being able to open a car with my phone and being able to type in the address in my phone that appears on the GPS.
I remember that in Berlin. Loved it.
It's mind-blowing. And that's what you want to achieve. You want to make people talk about your app, about your product from their own initiative, and want to share the value that brings to them, to their friends as well. So what is really valuable here is to implement NPS score tracking. So this is Net Promoter Score, where you can understand whether people would want to recommend your product to their friends or family or colleagues. And this is where you can also use open-ended questions to understand, why do people rate it low? What is the one problem or one thing that is preventing them from recommending the product? And then, of course, you need to understand the numbers that are important for you. So in our case with the self-service insurance app, if people log into the app frequently, that's not necessarily a success. And people don't want to check their insurance app unless they need to. So having high numbers in login, it should not always be something that you want to have high, or active users or engaged. What you want is to understand which tasks are important for customers or users to achieve successfully. And those are the ones that you want to track. So it really depends on your situation. But for us, to give an example, we want customers to be able to file a claim on their own without needing to contact customer care. And we want a certain percentage of all users to be able to file a claim digitally via their app, or change their personal details, or make changes that they would otherwise have to write or call customer care. Then customer care would have to do something and then create another task for someone to pick it up. And it doesn't make sense when we can do it digitally, in an automatic way.
And maybe another question: is testing killing spontaneity?
Yes, it does, and it should, definitely. You should not be spontaneous when you are implementing a feature. You should do that when you find the bug. You should spontaneously put it in the sprint if it's a really bad bug. But if you think about a feature, and if you're using sprints and the next sprint is starting in 2 days, you should not rush to put it in the sprint just because the timing works and you have time to specify the feature. You should really take your time to make sure that what you're putting into the sprint has been thought through properly. Someone else looked at it.
What's a good reply to time to market versus testing?
It depends. It's a good reply.
Yeah,
but what
I love this answer.
Yeah, me too. What I like to do is before a quarter starts, if you have a list of features that you know you want to implement in a quarter, if it's not a quarter, it's maybe the next 2 to 3 sprints, and you have a certain date when you know, especially if you have a native app, when the app needs to be released and certain amount of features need to go in. Whenever you have this information, even if it's features or epic on an epic level that are not specified enough, try to identify which are the ones that are safe to be put in and don't need any testing, or maybe need minimal user testing usability-wise, and try to identify the ones that are really critical that could benefit greatly from having a short test with a target user. And the quicker you identify that, the better you can plan for it, and you can communicate to your stakeholders that, look, for this particular feature, and we have the time, we want to invest this amount of time up front to test it before putting it, or before committing to this release date, if that's possible. It really, I know it depends how flexible you are on defining what the release date is, but what I would recommend is that you try to identify as soon as possible and manage the expectations of everyone, and not realize when there is 1 day left and the sprint starts, oh, actually, we're not sure if this is really obvious enough for people to use, or if it's the right thing to do, because then you will rush. And then what happens is the developers will come to you and say, I've implemented it the way you told me to, but it makes no sense to me. And then you're like, sorry, yes, you're right, we need to redo it. And you really don't want to experience that. It's not a great feeling.
Okay. So talking about feelings, how can you, I mean, how is it to make tests on different countries, and how you consolidate that?
Yes, so we actually are live in Germany and Switzerland, and even though we're based in Germany, in our case, we should really, and everyone should understand if there are any differences in the markets in terms of user behavior, user expectation, even the feature set. You may have different feature sets available in different markets. So then you should try to identify what are the potential differences and make sure that you are adapting your product to that market. And to do that, obviously, you should talk to your users. If you cannot talk to your users, talk to people who talk a lot to their users. And I'm not just talking about customer care, talking to angry customers, but really anyone who has access to them. Can be salespeople who sell your product for the first time and have a lengthy discussion with the customer, understanding their needs. That is really valuable. And that's something we are doing right now. But try to see what are the potential differences. See upfront how are people, if they are using your product differently, and if yes, that's where you should start.
Brilliant. Good. So I will ask you a last question, and maybe, what are the key takeaways in convincing stakeholders then that this is really important? I know it will start with it depends.
No,
What
not
served you? Okay.
Not this time. No, so it starts with getting to know your stakeholders, understanding them as a person, understanding what motivates them, why are they reluctant to accepting your suggestions. Are they the ones who have come up with the idea or not? See what is really important to them and try to educate them or bring awareness on smaller things. So start little, try to be on the same page as they are. Don't try to pick a fight or be aggressive and say, I think what we're doing here is not going to work. But rather say, I'm really committed to making this a really successful product for our users. I think this is something that we should test and make sure we are right. I want to invest time, my personal time, if it's needed, on getting proof that there is more to test here and showing this proof in any way. The best is a recording if it's video, but not everyone wants to be recorded. But it's really the most, gets the idea across the quickest. If not, just bring quotes from interviews that you can do, even if it's 1 or 2 people that are target users, and show that we have an opportunity to make this better. It's not about showing that we're wrong, but it's about getting the proof and understanding the way to making things more successful for us as a business and as a company.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Thank you, Mara,
Thank you,
for this
Mihai.
overview and structure overview. I mean, I took a lot of lessons for me. I'm also, I mean, I also run a platform. It's not an app, but it's still a lot of, we're testing and testing, web-based, and how users are taking the decisions, what convinced them, or how do they understand the product before buying it. And I find your outlay very important for any person that is actually working in this field. So thank you very much. I hope to have you again and see great results with Wefox. And have a nice end of the day and second half of the week. And with all the rest, the people that are watching us, we will see each other next week on Wednesday, this time with Mexico, and we'll spend a bit of time there and see how it works. Bye for now.
Bye.